Australia in the 1990s, a country associated with freedom, open roads, and endless travel routes. Thousands of young people come here with a backpack to see the world. One of the most popular ways to get around is hitchhiking. You stop a car on the road, get into a stranger's vehicle, and continue your journey. Back then, this was so common that no one considered it dangerous. But during this period, in the state of New South Wales, people begin to disappear. At first, isolated cases. One tourist goes missing, then another, then a few more. Between 1989 and 1992, 7 tourists disappeared, 2 men and 5 women. 2 victims were British, 2 were Australian, and 3 were German. An unknown attacker used firearms, often tying up the victims first and then using them as targets. Some victims were stabbed, and at least one was decapitated. He was also found guilty of robberies, including cases without murder. No clear connection. No obvious leads. But over time, it becomes clear this is not a coincidence. When the first bodies are discovered, the situation changes dramatically. These are no longer just missing persons. This is a series of murders, and everything points to the fact that the killer is following the same pattern. The victims are mostly young tourists, those who travel by hitchhiking, those who trust random drivers on the road. The investigation gradually begins to move forward. The police start connecting the cases. It becomes clear that all the victims disappeared in the same areas. Highways. Forest regions, places where witnesses are rarely present, and all of this leads to one very alarming conclusion. The killer knows the area very well. He acts in a calculated way. He chooses locations where he is almost impossible to notice, and most importantly, he selects his victims carefully. Ivan Milat, a name that would later become one of the most notorious in Australia's history. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about him. An ordinary man. No obvious signs of what was behind that calm exterior, but it's exactly people like this who tend to raise the least suspicion. The investigation moves to a new level when police realize that all the disappearances are connected far more deeply than it first seemed. By putting the cases together, investigators begin to build a single, unified picture: young people, hitchhiking, remote highways, and a strange, repeating pattern. Gradually, the main question emerges: who is behind all of this? And soon it becomes clear, this is not a random individual. This is someone operating according to a clear and calculated method. Ivan Milat did not choose his victims randomly. Most of them were young foreign tourists, people traveling light, trusting those around them. Hitchhiking gave him the perfect opportunity. He could simply pull over, offer a ride, and no one saw anything suspicious in it. Everything looked completely normal. And that's exactly what made him so dangerous. Once the victims got into his car, their fate was already sealed. Their bodies were later found in forested areas, often buried or hidden in hard-to-reach locations. This indicated that the killer was not acting on impulse. He knew exactly what he was doing. He understood how to cover his tracks. And he knew where to do it. Police begin to closely examine the roads where the tourists had disappeared. One of the key areas is the Belanglo State Forest, and it is there that several bodies are eventually discovered. This becomes a turning point. Now the investigation has direction. And now, there is a suspect. Gradually, details begin to surface that connect Milat to the crime scenes. His behavior, his movements, and certain testimonies that point to his possible involvement. But the evidence is still not enough, which means he remains free. And continues to be a threat. Meanwhile, the disappearances continue. Another tourist goes missing, then another. Each new case increases the pressure on the police. Public concern begins to grow. Warnings start to appear. But for many travelers, it's already too late, because they are already on the road, and they don't know that someone might be watching them, someone who has no intention of stopping. The investigation begins to move faster. And finally, evidence appears that could change everything. But to gather it, the police will have to face a very difficult opponent, a man who, for a long time, managed to stay beyond suspicion. and now is beginning to fight for his freedom. Gradually, the investigation starts to come together into a complete picture. Police begin to move beyond mere assumptions. They now have concrete leads that start linking Ivan Milat to the series of disappearances. Key evidence comes from the locations where the bodies were discovered, traces collected in forested areas, personal belongings of the victims, and most importantly, coincidences that can no longer be explained as chance. When investigators begin to analyze all of this together, it becomes clear they are no longer dealing with just a suspect. They are dealing with a man who is very likely directly connected to these crimes, but proving it is extremely difficult. That is why the operation to arrest him is prepared with great care. Eventually, police track him down, and in 1994, Ivan Milat is arrested. Now the investigation has a chance to prove his involvement in court. In other cases, the victims were killed with multiple blows from bladed weapons, including knives and even a sword. Some bodies showed dozens of stab wounds inflicted while the victims were still alive, which was confirmed by significant blood traces on their clothing. Criminal psychologists note that in the first scenario, the killer may have tried to avoid direct contact with the victims, possibly to avoid getting covered in blood. In particular, he was also suspected of several unsolved rapes and murders, but his involvement in those crimes was never proven. Among investigators, there is a theory that Milat may not have acted alone. Certain details in the case point in that direction. In particular, the methods of killing varied significantly. Into cases, the victims were tied up and then shot with a rifle from a distance. Precise shots to the head. But the trial turns out to be long and complex. Milat remains confident. He does not admit guilt. He denies all accusations and tries to prove he has nothing to do with these crimes. The trial attracts massive public attention. Milat is sentenced to 7 life terms, along with an additional 18 years in prison. Despite the verdict, there are still unresolved aspects in the case. In the second case, it may indicate deliberate and particularly sadistic violence. Another argument supporting the theory of an accomplice is the fact that most of the victims were traveling in pairs. In such a situation, it would be extremely difficult for a single person to control 2 victims at the same time, which raises further doubts about the possibility that he acted alone. The case gains widespread attention not only in Australia, but around the world. A dangerous man who posed a threat to travelers is no longer free. But for the victims' families, this does not bring their loved ones back. The story of Ivan Milat leaves behind not only tragedy, but also an important lesson that even in the safest places, danger can exist. That trusting strangers can sometimes come at a very high cost, and that it is important to stay cautious, even when everything seems calm. Ivan Milat died in prison in 2019, but his story remains one of the darkest chapters in Australia's history. And it still raises one question: how many more stories like this remain unknown?